I guess we're live.
Yay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the first multilingual summer series. I'm Melissa Biggs, a consulting partner with Locale Solutions, a localization consulting firm, and I'm going to be your host and moderator today for the discussion. Let's talk about localization challenges with market pivots. We hope you'll enjoy sharing this closing summer session series panel discussion as we dive into a major driver for all localization practitioners and organizations, the challenges and changes for localization during market pivots. This is one of those topics that affects us all, whatever our roles in localization are. We have here today, I might say, a powerful panel of leaders with localization expertise across a range of markets, companies in B2B, B2C, and consumer spaces. They're leaders who built and evolved successful localization organizations during many instances of change. Before we get started, though, I'd like to first thank the multilingual team for putting this series together and for making it such a great informative series covering many things localization. This live session is being recorded, and we will also want to thank our interpreters who will be creating interpretations of this particular panel, as well as all of the three others that have already happened. Today, our guest panelists are going to be sharing their experience in an especially relevant topic for localization for all of you and for global business, for that matter, the localization challenges that come with market pivots. We're eager to share our thoughts with you today on one of these big challenges for change. Our panelists are Loy Searle, now leading WorkDay localization, Pascale Tremblay, managing localization at The Gap, and Lorna Whelan, Senior Director of Localization at TripAdvisor. They're going to give you a little bit of their background now before we get off and running with our challenge discussions. Would one of you like to start? Thanks.
I can start. I'm Loy, and I've been in the localization industry since the 90s, so I'm an old timer, I'd say, in the space. Have led localization functions and also content functions for companies like JD Edwards, Intuit, led global language services as well as production for Google. Also did a stint in the entertainment industry on the supplier side at Deluxe. So currently leading localizations and content at WorkDay. And I'm also leading this year and last Women in Localization, and have my own little side gig called the Global Guild, where I build mentorship programs. So I kind of speak from a few angles. My passion is localization. I love this space and love the process, love the people, love the technology, love the problems. So do you want to go next, Lorna?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Lorna. I'm Senior Director of Localization at TripAdvisor, and what that means is that I'm responsible for the localization strategy and execution for all the brands within TripAdvisor, and that covers everything from product to marketing, support, user-generated content, and everything in between. I've been in localization for over 20 years now, and have been at Trip for about 10. Before that, I did spend some time on the vendor side as well, so I have the perspective from both sides. Things that I'm passionate about within localization, I would say, are firstly enabling scale for enterprise localization. That's something I'm really passionate about, from the technology and the resources and the processes, and also I would say automation, but not for the sake of automation for the purpose of firstly enabling scale, and then also for ensuring that the people that I have on my team are focusing on solving business problems and bringing real value to the business rather than focusing on tasks. I just want to add as well that I'm really excited to be on this panel and to join in this conversation with Loy and Pascale. So big thank you, Melissa, for inviting me to join. Pascale.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. This is, to echo Lorna, this is exciting to participate in this panel with all of you wonderful and amazing localization professionals. I work at The Gap. I've been at The Gap for quite some time, since 2006. I actually started in localization in the software industry a few years prior to Gap. I haven't been nonstop at The Gap since 2006. I also work in the solar industry as a localization professional too. And then for the past few years, I've rejoined The Gap, and we've definitely taken it to a next level. So our team at The Gap is centralized, and we have two main groups. So we have a group that manages translations for store employees. And the group that I do manage is customer-facing content. So web content, marketing, sourcing. And I also own the technology aspect of localization at The Gap. So that means the translation management system, the roadmap development, but also all the store employees' applications that needs to be localized. I'm very, very passionate about localization. That's what I love. That's what I do. I've been in all sorts of roles throughout my career at The Gap and elsewhere. And I'm really passionate about simplifying the complexity of localization for all our business partners. And I'd like to think of ourselves
for those great introductions. So let's get started with a discussion. I don't think it's an understatement to state that market pivots are very much on everyone's mind right now as we steer our way through these uncharted waters. Our localization organizations over time have had to face these market pivots and big changes as a matter of course in doing business. So given that, how do we begin to look at this as a phenomenon and bring it forward as one of the critical challenges that we face every day and may not think about so much? And how are we going to look at our management and the way we see the future of our localization groups as well as our businesses to be able to change these drivers of market pivots in a really effective way? So given that little introduction to and setting the stage for market pivots, let's discuss a little bit about the market changes that we see as panelists in responding to the market pivots. What are the big issues and challenges that you all are seeing? Lorna, would you like to start out?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, as somebody who works in a company in the travel space, I guess the current situation that we're all going through is something that's particularly impacted us. And there's been a very significant amount of, the business has contracted, and the changes that we needed to make to respond to that were quite significant, and we needed to move very, very quickly on that. And that included everything from, stopping translation for certain languages, cutting back for certain content types, headcount reduction, unfortunately, cut in funding for technology changes that we wanted to make and things like that. So it was a lot to deal with over a pretty short period of time. And the way that I was approaching it was firstly to just be really, really ruthless in our prioritization and make sure that everybody is very clear about what we're focusing on, what we're not focusing on. The second thing is around communication. So particularly during times of contraction, I think more so than expansion, the need to ensure that stakeholders are aware of, at the very least, and preferably aligned with all the decisions and changes that are happening is hugely important. and also with regard to, my own team internally, making sure that they're fully aware of, again, the priorities of what we're focusing on. And thirdly, with regard to our translation partners, keeping them, as being as open and honest with them as we can be is also really, really important. And I think, the situation that we're going through at the moment is probably an extreme case of contraction for us. And, during times like this, there's obviously huge impact on the business, but there's also huge impact on people and their personal lives, and just, being a human good manager as much as possible, and, talking with people one-on-one more regularly and giving them the flexibility to kind of get used to working in this new situation as well. So I think, I guess to sum up, I would probably say for us, it was about ruthlessly prioritizing, focusing on communication, and then focusing on the team, my team as well.
Pascale, would you like to add anything from your perspective at Gap?
Yes. So I think at the Gap, it's interesting because market pivots can happen over a long period of time, but they can also happen very quickly. At the Gap, and as much as many retailers over the last few years, the focus has been to digitally transform your company to meet the new customer behavior and so on and so forth. So during a market pivot that's spread over a long time, for the localization team, you can expect the traditional business sequence. You have to do your roadmaps, you have to align your goals, you have to plan your resource allocation, and you have to plan your team according to where the new goals of the company are going in the new direction. So this has been the case for the Gap for the past couple of years as we continue to transform with technology. However, with the COVID crisis, we also experienced on top of that a very quick pivot, which completely changed the business. And I think for the localization team, the challenge became greater. So I think to Lorna's point, communication is critical. And as a team becomes much faster. So as we were already transforming, everything got amplified, and you had to have a mindset of readiness. So you have to execute, but you have to be ready to make decisions really quickly. So what I think of the key requirements for a localization team is you have to be flexible, you have to be accountable, but you have to be also adaptable. So once you put in place this kind of framework for your team, and you have this pivot that comes to you, and then you can move quickly because you have workload shift. At the Gap, and like so many retailers, shelter in place meant all our brick and mortar stores closed down. So what does it mean for us? Well, it meant anything that was customer facing and store production got completely shut down. There's no stores, and everything shifted to the online. And as we were ramping up with a promotion for spring break, we went in shelter in place on March 13. 2 days later, the Monday, all our messaging had to be switched to, oh, you're going to work from home. Here's your cozy attire, and so on and so forth. So being a team that is very adaptable and has a plan for those exceptions, and it was definitely a big challenge. But I think it's at the core for the localization team. This is what you need to be prepared so that you can pull the lever whenever the situation asks you to do so.
So thank you so much for giving those examples, Pascale, because your first example of digital transformation is so relevant as a market pivot that Gap went through from being mainly a physical presence, store presence, to moving to the digital space and e-commerce. Totally. That's more of a planned pivot, and it really maps very nicely to to what you can also do when an unexpected market pivot, such as what we're seeing today with a COVID crisis occurs. Thank you. Loy.
I would love to piggyback on something that Pascale talked about with the shift to digital, because I've seen a couple things where both at WorkDay and also at Women in Localization over this crazy period of time. At Women in Localization, all of our events were in person. That was really what we were about, is meet up in person, share a glass of wine, have some nibbles, and visit with your friends and colleagues in the industry. And we had a plan to go online this year and build kind of a global community and address the folks that didn't have a place to show up. But that plan was late in the year. It was not in the first quarter. And so we had kind of a wild scramble as an organization to have all of the local chapters make the shift to doing webinars and streaming and that whole approach, and then launching the global chapter much sooner than we'd expected to. So that was a big shift, I would say, for us in timing. It was probably goodness that we planned for it, but we were not ready to execute yet. So I think we had moments of stumbling while we worked our way through that. At WorkDay, it's been kind of interesting in that a couple things. Obviously, we're in that kind of lovely HR ERP space. So there's a lot of people that look to our company for information on how to handle some of these crazy times. So there was a wild flurry of activity to come up with response to COVID and get that kind of information out there in our products. But there was also it was one of those times where you realize your product's a good fit, because our product's in the cloud. And so our customers were pretty much able to make that shift very easy for working with our solutions. So consequently, I would say we didn't feel the pain of certain sectors. If anything, our organization is in sort of a strange place in that a company that normally travels a lot, that has a lot of moving parts, normally we have bigger expenses. And so this quarter, they're looking around for like, hey, how do we spend this extra money in investment that we normally would be spending, but we're not spending right now due to COVID? So my team is actually in the strange position of like trying to figure out how to spend money really faster than we plan to. So that's a quality problem, not always an easy one, but that's sort of the unusual place that I think these market pivots can push us to, either extreme contraction or extreme expansion, and having to do it very quickly. So we're in that zone, but in slightly different ways from you two ladies.
Well, let's carry this discussion on a little bit with what you just said, Loy, about some of the big effects. What do you, Pascale and Lorna, see as some of the effects as far as potential contraction or change that occurs during these market pivots with your businesses?
Well, I think Loy brought up a good point in talking about budget, because not all industries will experience the contraction of the crisis in the same way. So in retail, because you're not getting the same revenue generation from your brick and mortar store, then difficult decisions needs to be made. However, what I've observed is that because we were part of the digital transformation, but also you're trying to adapt very, very quickly to this new reality, then if you have project in technology that enables scale, that enable more efficiency, then your project is a go. And they happen very, very quickly. So for us, as we continue to develop our platform and our processes, there was actually an incredible benefit to the organization team. However, if your budget was linked to maybe store production or employee assets, the budget might not be guaranteed for you. So, and managing through that while keeping your resources, while keeping your employee engaged is a little bit challenging, because there's a lot of insecurities behind all that.
Do you find that you've had some shifts in your language coverage, or the amount of content that you're that you're producing as a result of one of your pivots?
I would say the amount that we're producing is equally, is very similar, but the content is very different because we shifted our focus to online, but also in a time of change, the same way we have to communicate and keep the communication open with our own team, with our vendors, and with our business partners. The company also has to communicate to its employees, to its different market. So it's an interesting shift because the volume is very similar, but the content has shifted.
Very significant technology or process changes, but it's probably the time where you realize that you want to or you need to. Our significant changes have really kind of come at a point more where there's been expansion as opposed to contraction. And I think what I've also noticed is that expansion, when you're going through a time of expansion, then the focus tends to be more on technology and process changes that enable faster time to market, whereas when you're focusing on or going through a time of contraction, it does tend to be more about, you know, doing the same or more with less or the same budget or headcount. And what we've also done through the current situation is we've developed a language strategy, which means that we're essentially being smarter around what content we are localizing. It's not necessarily that there's more of it, but we're focusing more on the languages that matter and less on the ones that don't.
Yeah. I would pivot off of Lorna's comment there that we're in the same, some of the same position in that we're finally starting at the place that we're in as a company to look at our languages, set up tiering, decide what is the most appropriate level of deliverables for each of the tiers, and how do we define our tiers, and what's the business strategy associated with that. So I think that that's, you know, not every company I think does that, but I think you get to a certain place, either a crisis will take you there or opportunity will take you there to kind of work through a modeled approach.
And Pascale, have you done something similar with your language strategy, or is it left as is?
For the time being, it's pretty much left as is. It was mostly focusing on scaling and efficiencies to get to market faster.
So going back to a question that Lorna posed, and a point that Lorna posed earlier about technology and what you're doing, what you do with your technology during the market pivot. Are any of you seeing more or less use of machine translation, machine learning, different connections to other tools within your infrastructure to enable more and faster localization?
I could speak to that. I would not say this has driven our change to look at machine translations and things like that. But I do think that certainly during periods where you're contracting, it's a much easier conversation to look at how you can leverage machine translations and all the good places that it can be used and how it can be used wisely. So I think we're all seeing that shift in our industry space, but it definitely makes the dollar go a little further. So it's a strategy I've used over the years when I'm trying to accomplish more with less. It's a very useful tool.
Yeah, I would just to add to what Loy said, I think what I'm noticing in particular now that we have a language strategy is it gives you a space to play around with options that you wouldn't have necessarily considered before. So when you suddenly have, obviously the focus does need to be on the priority markets and getting those right, but when you've got lower priority markets or lower priority content, that gives you an opportunity to try out different solutions that maybe you wouldn't have before. because of quality concerns and things like that, and figure out what works for you or for your languages or for your content that you can then kind of move more into the mainstream of your priority languages. And it's quite that's something we're doing at the moment, and it's quite it's an interesting space to play in.
Would any of you say that you're using any type of automation to handle more long tail languages or minor languages that you might not have considered in other contexts?
I think I can speak to automation here. The way we use automation for our team is really to cut the noise in terms of project management. We want to ensure our project managers are really adding business value in terms of what they do when we manage our translation request. So automation is part of the standard business processes. And then especially when you work with a lot of marketing team, visual teams, and also marketing content, whether it's for the internal employees, but also for the customer, there's a lot of touch point for the project managers. So we focus on supporting the teams with our project managers there, and we automate as much as we can for all other business processes that can be automated. Therefore, we can meet the constant shifting requirements. And I think one of the side effects of the crisis or the market pivots is always you're asked to do things at a much faster pace. And in our industry, the moment you start raising the bar, you can never go back. So now we're here and we're still in a crisis. So as we continue planning for the future, automate, and really look at the role and responsibilities of my team members, okay, now we are here, so we can plan that we're going to try to expand over here. The speed's probably going to continue to increase. So it's a very interesting challenge. So automation is critical in order to continue to meet that high demand from the market.
And wouldn't you say that you're getting some of your high demand too from your internal teams that you interface with, the people to whom you're responsible for content and for translations?
I'm sorry, what do you mean with the question? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me clarify that a little bit more. But wouldn't you say that you have to be more responsive in speed too to your internal stakeholders, those teams that are giving you data to publish, information that they want to get out to customers very quickly in a time when communication is really foremost? And
yeah, the demand on our business partners just gets, and the stakes are higher and higher. So the way they work with us and their request, it becomes much faster. So it's it's a trickle down effect. Basically, they get all these requests, and so we're here, and we need to be able to support them. So I should say also at the Gap we have a self-serve model. So we train them, and we also establish SLAs, but those SLAs are always, if I may say, exploding, because the demand on the market are always constantly changing and constantly asking for more and faster. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, let's talk a little bit too about other general market issues around your language strategy and how you look at your markets and decide whether to promote or demote your language coverage as a result of a market pivot or a big change. Loy, you want to talk about that first?
Sure. I've actually never had to cut a language because of a market pivot, so I'm feeling for Lorna up there. What I have had to do is cut scope, and scope is it's a hard thing to cut, where you basically pull back what you have always done in the past, and then everyone still expects that, but they don't get it anymore. So I have had to do that, and that's a hard conversation. I'd say the other thing that I've had to do that is not a usual occurrence, I've not done it often, is actually demote a language. I think for many of us, we may have picked up languages that were added on due to the strength of someone's personality, or due to the power of a sales organization under one individual, or things like that over our years in this industry. And then you look at the numbers in that language and you go, yeah, I don't see it. So I've definitely demoted languages, and that usually makes some people sad, but it's often the right business decision to make. There should be a relationship between your revenue to your spend. I'd say the other piece on this that I think about when I think about the market pivots is I have also been in the space where the growth opportunity, if we think of some of the consumer markets, where the growth opportunity is suddenly exploding, and the need to go into a whole bunch of markets, a whole bunch of languages really fast, was actually the challenge. So contraction, while it's easier to do, is more emotionally painful. Expansion is harder to do, but a lot more fun. So that's been my experience of those two areas. One is easier, but it sucks.
Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, so we've it's only this year that we've finally gotten around to developing our language strategy, which is an achievement on its own. And we're now that we have it, we're trying to figure out like how to get that message across to the rest of the business and align that strategy with the roadmaps for product and marketing. So we're not as far down the line as sounds as Loy and Pascale in that regard, but we're figuring that out.
Let's change focus just a little bit. And what do you all see as some of the big opportunities that a market pivot or a shift makes available to you? And how do you take advantage of that?
I have one if you want. I actually have one that's
Perfect.
not mine. I have one that's somebody else's. I won't name names, but I have a good friend in the industry who was trying to make a change, process and vendors and technology in this space. And she's in healthcare and government, and COVID hit, and it put so much stress and demand on her organization that a change that she had been trying to make, that she knew was going to take through the government process at least a year to a year and a half, she was able to do in less than a week. So there is so much power in recognizing whether or not your needs and the things that are essential for your group to succeed in support of the crisis, to recognize those things and raise your hand when you know you need to do something in order to properly support it. Those things get approved so fast. When you're in the way of proper execution, that opportunity can be fabulous. So I've seen some really lovely things come out of a rather challenging time.
I would agree with Loy on this one. The crisis can be an amazing opportunity to bring positive changes to your processes, also bring more visibility to some other teams or some other parts of the organization that in usual times might not have been so inclined to listen to what you had to offer, because everybody is presented with this crisis and they need to find a solution, and quickly. And if, as I mentioned, if you have your vision and you have your mindset of being ready to execute, and you can present, hey, we have a solution, here's what we can pull as a lever for your crisis at the moment. And for our team, it was also an amazing experience, because we were able to trigger changes to different teams, and positive change, because we were able to meet their requirements, or not meet their requirements, but meet the requirements of the market in which they found themselves overnight.
Great. What do you do? What do each of you do or see as a possibility for future-proofing your organizations through a market pivot? Things that you can do to either ensure that you're more nimble in the future, or that you have a stronger organizational fallback, so that you don't find yourself scrambling so much with each change that comes along. So I think we've all been in that space.
Yeah, well, if I can add to this opportunity for change, I think the crisis allows you to look at your roles and responsibilities on your team and see, oh, is this working right now? Where is the work coming from? What's the direction that we're following? Because a crisis will definitely bring change. And for us and for my team at the moment, we're in the middle of recalibrating what are the expectations for each member. What we were doing 2 months ago, does that still make sense, or have we outgrown those processes? And should we look at the support to our brands in a different way? So that's actually an amazing space as well to recalibrate and probably reassess your goals, so that continuing to evolve from the current moment to evolve to new processes and scalability, it's definitely going to bring additional change and probably evolve the localization model within that space, because the demand is completely different.
Lorna, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, yes, I was just going to add that I think most localization teams are essentially set up to be flexible. We have to be. The very topic that we're talking about today, business contraction and expansion, means that we're doing this kind of on a continuous basis. Essentially, there are extremes every now and then, but it's something we're dealing with all the time. And so, we set ourselves up to have work on an outsourced models and are having our internal team really focusing on problem solving. And I think essentially that's not something that's going to kind of change anytime soon. And I also think that, during times of market pivot, essentially more predominantly and with contraction rather than expansion, that being really open and honest with translation partners as well is hugely important, because in some cases they're a lot smaller businesses and the impact can be greater on them, and just being really honest with them to kind of get through the situation is really important.
Yeah, I'd piggyback on what Lorna said. This pivot, I haven't had this experience, so I'm thankful for that. But in a previous one, I had the experience of pretty much losing almost all of my budget over almost a 6-month period for my review program. And knowing that I didn't want to lose all my reviewers. They were important to what we did. So having to do that kind of collaborative mad scramble with the vendor to retain and figure out clever ways that we could divert translation work and kind of redistribute work so that we could keep the channel, I would say, alive and on life support while we went through that blip. But your vendor relationship is everything. If you don't have good open communication and the ability to plan for flex and for contraction, it's really hard to get the support that you need. And at the end of the day, we have underneath us in our industry, the foundation is people. There's a lot of technology in what we do, and there's a lot of process, but there's also a lot of people trying to pay their mortgages and pay their rent. So I think it's really our responsibility to predict as well as we can and communicate wildly when prediction's impossible during these crazy times.
Pascale, do you have anything to add to that?
I think I could not agree more with Loy. I mean, and I think that represents also a unique challenge for the localization industry, because we depend on vendors, and all of us in the industry have different models of resources. And also we depend on, for the most part, if you don't have your own engineers or your own technology team, you depend on a translation management system that is owned by a different vendor. So when you come to a crisis moment like that, communication is key. And I think it also shapes the industry, because your needs are changing. You're also challenging your vendors to think in a different way. You're challenging them by saying, hey, I know we worked greatly for the past years together, and this is how we were doing it. I'm sorry, but we have to think of it differently, because now this is the new reality. And again, I think communication is key. You have to bring them along as you discover what is happening to your industry. And sometimes just telling them, oh, well, there's no updates, we don't have any content this week. That's one of the consequences of our market pivot. But no updates is as important as sending them the updates and telling them the story of, hey, this is what's happening, this is where we're going, thank you for coming along. And yeah, so I think that's our unique challenge too.
This is great. Would anyone like to really bring this all together as a final focus and share a couple of takeaways for our audience? Anything?
I'll add one. I think the industry that we're in is a marvelously codependent industry. None of us succeed on the strength of ourselves or even on our teams. We succeed on the strength of ourselves, our technology, our teams, and our supply chain and our partnerships. And during the hard times, we collaborate, I'd say, more tightly to try to make it all hold together. And then during the boom times, I think we get pretty demanding. So I do think that it's the lovely thing about our industry is that we have this kind of symbiotic relationship that most of the time I think works pretty well. And I look at the pivots that I've been through in my career over the years, ups and downs in different industry spaces, cuts to teams, cuts to organizations, mergers, acquisitions, all the crazy things that can happen. And I look at the industry that we're in, and I'm still bumping shoulders and elbows with people that I knew 20 years ago. It's a fabulous space, and a lot of it is really about relationship and the people involved in this field that care about the field and care about the people in it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll keep mine pretty short. I think one of the things that I found most valuable during the current situation that we're going through is having our language strategy defined. So I would suggest define your language strategy, and that gives you a solid basis to refer back to, regardless of what happens in the future, whether business expands or needs to contract again. It also gives you opportunity to test new solutions. So I find it really exciting for that reason.
I think when being at the Gap for so long and so imprinted with the culture and everything, one of the founders' famous quote that we always share internally is, you have to change or you fail. It's change or fail, basically. And I think in the localization industry, there's nothing more, in many industries actually, there's nothing more constant than change. So when you think about that and you build your team and your philosophy behind, hey, there's going to be always change and constant evolution, then I think you're helping yourself and your team to be set for success.
Fantastic. Those areas that you just covered of being constant change agents, communicating, up, down, across, internally, externally. It's all so critical. Speed in your work, which I think all of you have talked about in this session, and also your language strategy. Those four cornerstones are really critical to handling market pivots, handling change pivots within all of our organizations. Does anyone have any final comments before we go to the questions from the audience?
Just thank you for hosting us, Melissa.
Well, thank
Yes,
you.
thank you very much.
You've been a
Thank you.
wonderful, fantastic panel. And it's great to be working with all of you. So, do we have any questions from the audience? You can use your messaging window to indicate any questions. I do notice a comment that everyone sounds very good in French, so we know that the interpretation is quite nice. Okay, here's our first question for the panelists. Could you name a current problem or challenge that you and your team are experiencing right now? Thanks very much. Anyone want to take that?
I think I already spoke to mine, which is we're trying to figure out how to spend a lot of money very quickly. And that's a fabulous challenge, but it is happening right now.
And my current challenge with my team and my team members is the recalibration of the roles and responsibilities, because there's definitely a shift. So how do we adapt to this new reality? So we're right now evaluating how best to support this new workload.
I think for TripAdvisor, the challenge that we have is, now that we have our language strategy, how do we get that rolled out across the business and onto roadmaps?
Okay, another question that's come in. When you had to start support for new markets and languages, how did you establish a good pool of resources? We find it challenging to train new translators without glossary and style guides. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts or ideas. Thanks.
So what I can jump in. So what we've done at Trip is, when we are launching in new markets, is well, the first thing is, I mean, there's no expectation that translation is going to be perfect out of the gate when you're starting with a new pool of talent for a new language, and so you have to give time to get everything set up. And so we typically hire a linguist in-house to start with, who helps with setting up the style guide and the glossary, and we work with our translation partners to get that in place. They obviously exist for other languages, so you're not starting completely from scratch. And then it's a process of feedback on an ongoing basis between our internal linguist and the language teams externally, to get to that place where quality expectations are being met.
I support Lorna in that, especially for like tier 1 markets. I think it's awesome to have a linguist. It really controls your quality in the market. For long tail languages, when I've had to add long tail languages, there's a couple things I've done. One of them is leverage your vendor to find you resources. You should, if you have 2 vendors, leverage the other vendor to validate the testing of those resources. So at least you've got 2 eyes saying, yes, this is a good guy for Swahili. And then I've typically leveraged vendor as acting almost as a review, like a language specialist light role for those long tail languages, and typically would put in place at least one person to manage all the unstaffed languages, to make certain that the quality calls are happening, the quality stats are being evaluated. You've actually got that engagement, and you know if you've got translators who've gone dark or seem to be never, ever, 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 ever failing anything ever, ever, you can at least probe. So I found that works for the long tail languages. You can at least still own it and not just wonder when you get a bug if it's legitimate.
I think I would just like to add, because similar to Lorna and Loy, the same road I would choose to evaluate linguists for a new market, but I think it depends also on the setup of your company. So if you have offices in the new market, if you have trusted business partners, especially for the marketing piece, it's important to build a relationship with your market and to really understand what are the expectations and so that you can choose together that level of quality that they are waiting for you to produce. And and then you also want to select probably a few resources, because there's so many opinions all the time. So you need to make sure that this is also, you get a buy-in from your business.
Yeah, agree.
Another question: how can you assure that you're getting alignment with your corporate goals during a pivot in market change, as well as alignment with what your field is telling you that they need as far as support from your localization services?
I have one thought on that, which is a lot of times the disconnect is that the budgets can be corporately owned and managed, but the field is often the part of the company that has the needs, the wants, and the wishes. So I think I don't think even a market pivot is necessarily essential to that question. I think there's always a balance between what is your corporate central budget and how do you support all of your markets. In a perfect world, you'd have a big pie for everybody. That perfect world has existed for me for like 10 minutes at a couple different companies. It doesn't last very long. Enjoy it if you ever have the experience. I think of it as more of you prioritize, you balance, you plan, and you do that with the field, and you do that as part of corporate. And it always helps if there's a little bit of co-funding in there. If something's really important and they can find some dollars and you can share, that can go a long ways. And then next year you make a better plan and the plan gets tighter and tighter as you go. But there's always pressure in that. I've never seen it be absolutely perfect for more than 10 minutes.
Anyone else?
I think Loy said it really well.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any further questions from our audience? Wait just a second.
Can I do a plug?
Absolutely.
The Women in Loc LA chapter. I don't know if you guys caught that note in there. They're having a little virtual happy hour this week, tonight.
Thank you for mentioning that one. That was in part of our comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I caught that flying by and I should have remembered it anyway. So thanks, ladies.
Okay. Well, if we have no further questions, we'll close this session a little early for everyone and give you some time back. Today, I want to thank our panelists, Pascale, Lorna, and Loy, for a fantastic discussion. And I hope you've all gotten a lot out of this and have some good takeaways to help you as either an individual or an organization to manage effectively through market pivots and big changes that are part of the constants of working in the localization world. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.